And just when Zuberi thought everything was finally over, he had no idea the truth he uncovered was only the beginning of something even darker waiting beneath the village silence. Some stories don't end when you walk away. Zuberi stepped off the dusty road with a slow breath, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the same red earth he once walked barefoot. The sun hung low over the village, painting everything in a golden glow, yet nothing felt warm to him. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, returning not as the boy they pitied, but as a man they would admire. His clothes were clean, expensive, carefully chosen to show the world he had conquered, but beneath them his heart beat with a quiet fear he could not explain. As he walked forward, the village seemed to notice him all at once. Conversations slowed, then stopped. A group of women by the well turned their heads in unison, their eyes narrowing as if trying to recognize something they had lost long ago. Children paused their games, whispering behind small hands. An old man sitting beneath a tree leaned forward, squinting at him with unsettling intensity. Zuberi forced a small smile, lifting his chin slightly as if confidence alone could bridge the distance growing around him. This was home. These were his people. Yet the air felt thick with something he could not name. He passed familiar huts, each one carrying memories that now felt like fragments of someone else's life. The tree where he used to sit when hunger kept him awake still stood, but it no longer felt like it belonged to him. The path he once ran down as a child now seemed longer, heavier, as though it resisted his return. A voice broke through the silence. "That cannot be him." The words were soft, almost lost in the wind, yet they struck him harder than any shout. He slowed his steps, his smile fading just enough to reveal the crack beneath it. For a moment, doubt slipped into his chest. Had time changed him so much that even his own people could not see him anymore? He tightened his grip on the small leather bag in his hand. Inside it was proof of everything he had become. Wealth. Success. A new life. Surely that would be enough. His steps slowed as he reached the house he had dreamed of for years. The walls looked smaller than he remembered, the roof worn with time, yet it still carried the weight of everything he had lost. He stood there, just a few feet away, staring at the wooden door that separated him from the past he thought he had left behind. His chest tightened with a mixture of excitement and fear, his hands slowly rising as if unsure whether he was ready to knock. This was the moment he had waited for. He imagined the door opening, faces lighting up with recognition, arms pulling him into a long overdue embrace. He imagined hearing his name spoken with pride, not pity. But as his fingers hovered inches from the door, a quiet chill slipped through him, soft yet warning. Something felt terribly wrong. In that silent moment, the door creaked open slowly, as if even it was unsure about what stood on the other side. Zuberi straightened his posture, a hopeful smile already forming, ready to step into the moment he had dreamed of for years. But the face that met him did not light up with recognition. It froze instead. His older brother stood there, staring at him with narrowed eyes, his expression shifting from confusion to something colder. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, pressing against Zuberi's chest. "Yes," his brother finally said, his voice flat, unfamiliar. The smile on Zuberi's face trembled. "It's me," he said softly, almost laughing as if this was some strange joke. "Zuberi. I'm back." The name hung in the air, but it didn't land. His brother's face hardened. "You have the wrong house." Zuberi blinked, the words not making sense at first. No, this is my home. You're my brother. We grew up here. Don't you remember?" His voice carried a fragile urgency now, like someone trying to hold onto something slipping away. Footsteps sounded from inside. Another figure appeared behind the door, his mother. The moment Zuberi saw her, something inside him broke open with relief. "Mama," he breathed, stepping forward slightly. Her eyes met his. For a split second, something flickered there. Recognition. Pain. Memory. But just as quickly, it disappeared. She stepped back. "I don't know you," she said quietly. The words struck deeper than anything else could have. Zuberi felt the ground beneath him shift, his heartbeat turning uneven. "Mama, it's me," he insisted, his voice shaking now. "You used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep. You called me your strong one, you said I would survive anything. I remember the night the roof leaked and we all stayed awake, laughing to forget the rain." His words came faster, desperate, pulling pieces of the past into the present like proof he could hold in his hands. But instead of softening, their faces tightened. His brother stepped forward slightly, blocking the doorway. "Enough," he said sharply. "We don't know who you are, but you need to leave." Zuberi's chest rose and fell rapidly, confusion twisting into something darker. This wasn't normal. This wasn't forgetfulness. It felt deliberate. His eyes returned to his mother. She wasn't looking at him anymore. Her gaze had dropped to the ground, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. It was as if she was fighting something inside herself, and losing. "Please," Zuberi whispered, his voice barely holding together. "Just look at me." She didn't. Instead, she turned away. That was the moment something inside him cracked completely. Without another word, his brother pushed the door forward. It closed slowly at first, then firmly, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet evening air. Zuberi stood there, frozen, staring at the wooden surface now separating him from everything he thought he had come back to. The weight of his journey, his struggles, his success, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. His hand, still half raised from before, slowly dropped to his side. In that moment, a cold realization settled deep inside him. Coming back rich didn't bring him home. It erased him. Long before the fine clothes, before the quiet confidence he now carried, Zuberi had been just another thin boy moving through the same dusty paths with empty hands and an even emptier stomach. The village had not changed much, but back then, it felt heavier, as if every step reminded him of what he did not have. Their home was small, crowded, and always filled with tension that never needed words to be understood. Meals were never enough, and somehow, Zuberi always received the smallest portion. He learned early not to ask for more. Asking only made things worse. His brother was different. Stronger, louder, favored. When there was praise, it went to him. When there was food, it leaned in his direction. Zuberi noticed it in the way their father spoke, in the way their mother avoided his eyes when dividing what little they had. It wasn't said openly, but it was felt in everything. "You must learn to be useful," his father would say, his voice carrying quiet disappointment. But no matter how hard Zuberi tried, it was never enough. If he worked, it wasn't fast enough. If he helped, it wasn't good enough. Slowly, the idea settled inside him that he was not needed, not wanted. The nights were the hardest. Hunger made sleep impossible, and the silence in the house felt louder than any noise. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of others, wondering why he felt like a stranger in his own home. Sometimes, his mother would pass by him without a word, her face distant, as if she had already accepted something he didn't understand yet. Other times, he caught her watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice, her expression filled with something complicated, something that almost looked like regret. But even that was never enough to change anything. One evening, everything shifted in a way he would never forget. The argument started quietly, voices low but sharp. He wasn't meant to hear it, but the thin walls carried every word. "We cannot keep feeding him," his father said, his tone firm. "He is still your son," his mother replied, though her voice lacked strength. "Then why does it feel like he is only taking and giving nothing back?" The words burned deeper than anything Zuberi had ever felt. He sat frozen, his breath held, his chest tight as if something inside him was breaking silently. There was a pause, long and heavy, before his mother spoke again, softer this time. Maybe it would be better if he left. That moment stayed with him, carving itself into his memory with painful clarity. It wasn't anger that filled him. It was something colder. Something final. From that night on, everything changed. The looks became sharper. The silence grew heavier. And the space around him felt like it was slowly closing in, pushing him towards something he could no longer avoid. Leaving was never spoken about directly again. But it didn't need to be. He understood. And when the day finally came, when he stepped away from that house with nothing but the clothes on his back, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like the only way to survive. The road out of the village was longer than Zuberi had imagined. Each step felt uncertain, as if the ground itself questioned where he thought he was going. He didn't look back. Not because he was strong, but because he knew if he did, he might not be able to leave at all. The first days were the hardest. Hunger followed him like a shadow that refused to let go. He begged when he had no strength left, worked when someone offered even the smallest task, and slept wherever the night found him. Sometimes it was under trees, sometimes beside empty roads, and sometimes not at all. The world outside the village was not kinder. It was colder, faster, and far less forgiving. There were moments when he wondered if they had been right about him. If he truly was nothing more than a burden, someone the world would eventually discard. Those thoughts came most strongly at night, when the silence wrapped around him and left him alone with everything he was trying to escape. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into something harder to measure. His body grew thinner, his face sharper, but something inside him refused to break completely. It bent, it cracked, but it held on. Then one evening, when the sky was dimming and his strength had nearly run out, everything changed. He had collapsed near the edge of a busy roadside, too weak to move, too tired to care what happened next. The sounds of passing voices and distant movement faded in and out, like he was drifting between two worlds. That was when a shadow fell over him. "Are you going to stay there?" a voice said calmly, "or are you planning to get up?" Zuberi forced his eyes open. Standing above him was a man unlike anyone he had seen before. His clothes were simple, but clean. His posture carried quiet authority, and his eyes held something sharp, something observant, as if nothing escaped him. Zuberi tried to speak, but no words came out. The man studied him for a moment, then crouched down. "You're not weak," he said, almost as if stating a fact. "You're just unfinished." Those words didn't make sense, yet they stayed with him. The man offered him water first, then food, not out of pity, but with a strange sense of expectation. As if this wasn't kindness, but an investment. "Why are you helping me?" Zuberi finally managed to ask, his voice rough. The man gave a faint smile. "Because I've seen what happens to people like you," he replied. "They either disappear, or they become something the world cannot ignore." Zuberi didn't understand fully, but something about the way the man spoke made him listen. That night, for the first time since leaving the village, he slept without fear pressing against his chest. But it wasn't comfort that changed him. It was the feeling that his story had not ended on that road. It had only just begun. In the days that followed, the man did not reveal much about himself. He taught instead small things at first. How to observe, how to think before acting, how to see opportunity where others saw nothing. It wasn't easy. It was demanding, sometimes harsh, but it forced Zuberi to become aware of something he had never been allowed to see in himself. Value. Slowly, painfully, he began to change. The world that once seemed determined to break him started to shape him instead. Each struggle became a lesson. Each failure became a step forward. He was no longer just surviving. He was becoming. And though he didn't realize it yet, the boy they had sent away was already disappearing. Something else was taking his place. The world had broken him first, and now, it was quietly rebuilding him into something far more powerful. Zuberi's life no longer looked anything like the boy who once collapsed on the roadside. The days of begging and uncertainty slowly faded, replaced by a rhythm that demanded discipline, focus, and endurance. Nothing in his new world was easy, but for the first time, difficulty felt like direction instead of punishment. He learned quickly. Not because it was simple, but because failure was no longer an option. Every mistake carried consequences he could not afford to repeat. The man who had found him did not treat him like someone to be rescued, but like someone who had to be rebuilt. There were no comforting words, no false encouragement, only expectations. Wake up early. Observe everything. Speak less. Think more. At first, Zuberi resisted the pressure. His mind still carried the weight of rejection from his past, making it hard to trust structure, hard to believe that effort would lead anywhere different. But slowly, something inside him began to shift. He started noticing patterns others ignored. He began to see how people made decisions, how they revealed weakness without realizing it, how opportunities often hid behind hesitation. He was no longer just reacting to life. He was studying it. Years passed in a way that felt both slow and unstoppable. He moved through different cities, different environments, always learning, always adapting. He worked in places where no one remembered his name, and that anonymity became his advantage. While others sought recognition, he built understanding. There were nights when exhaustion nearly broke him. Nights when the weight of everything he had lost came back without warning. The memory of the village, the silence of his family, the feeling of being unwanted, it never fully disappeared. Instead, it became fuel. Something he used when strength alone was not enough. Success didn't come in a single moment. It arrived in layers. A decision that led to another opportunity. A risk that opened a door no one else noticed. A connection made at the right time. Each step built upon the last until what once seemed impossible began to take shape. People started to notice him differently. Not because he demanded attention, but because he no longer blended into the background. There was a quiet confidence in the way he spoke, a sharpness in the way he listened. He didn't waste words. He didn't seek approval. That alone made people pay attention. But even as his world expanded, something remained unspoken inside him. Every success felt slightly incomplete. There were moments when he would stand alone in expensive rooms, surrounded by voices that praised him, yet feel something missing that no achievement could fill. He told himself it was normal, that progress always comes with distance from the past, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Because every step forward seemed to push something behind him further into silence. He never spoke about where he came from. Not because he was ashamed, but because the memory of it felt complicated, unfinished. The village, the family, the rejection, it all existed like a closed chapter he had not decided how to end. And yet, no matter how far he went, it never fully disappeared. It followed him in quieter moments. In pauses between decisions. In the silence after success. Zuberi had risen from nothing, built himself from absence into presence, from invisibility into influence. But the higher he climbed, the more he began to realize something he couldn't yet explain. Not all success feels like freedom. Some of it feels like a door closing behind you, without telling you what's still on the other side. The world saw Zuberi as a success story, but the truth of his rise was never as clean as the stories people told about him. There were parts of his journey he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Not because they were forgotten, but because they were complicated in ways that words could not easily explain. Every major step forward had come with a decision that left a small weight behind it, something invisible to others but always present to him. It started with opportunity that didn't look like opportunity at first. When the mentor first tested him, it wasn't with guidance alone. It was with pressure, situations where there was never a perfect choice, only consequences. Zuberi learned quickly that in the real world, success often demanded sacrifices that didn't feel right in the moment. Sometimes it meant choosing speed over fairness. Sometimes it meant staying silent when speaking would cost him everything he had built so far. He justified it to himself at first. Survival had always required hard choices. But as his life grew more stable, those choices didn't disappear, they only became bigger. There were moments when deals were made in shadows, conversations where the full truth was never spoken, and opportunities that arrived because someone else lost something they could not afford to lose. Zuberi never called it wrongdoing. He called it strategy. But deep inside, he knew the line between the two was not as clear as he wanted it to be. And still, it worked. His rise accelerated faster than anyone around him expected. Money followed him, then influence, then respect. People began to associate his name with precision, intelligence, and results. No one questioned how quickly he had grown. In fact, most didn't care. They only saw the outcome, not the path. But Zuberi did. There were nights when he would sit alone in silence, staring at everything he had built, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. Pride was there, undeniable and real. He had transformed his life completely. The boy who had once been unwanted now had a name that carried weight. Yet pride was never alone. It always came with something else. A quiet guilt that refused to fully disappear. He told himself it was the price of ambition. That no rise ever came without cost. But the deeper truth was harder to admit. Some of the choices that brought him here were tied to moments he had never fully made peace with. And then there were the gaps. Pieces of his success that didn't quite fit neatly together when examined too closely. People he no longer worked with. Agreements that were never fully explained. Doors that opened too easily at the right time, as if someone had already cleared the path before him. He never asked too many questions about those moments. Because part of him already suspected the answers. Still, he could not stop the thought that lingered more and more often now. What exactly had he become, while trying to survive? The higher he climbed, the more fragile the foundation of certainty began to feel. Not because he was losing control, but because he could no longer ignore the possibility that his rise had been shaped by forces he didn't fully understand. And somewhere in the distance, buried beneath everything he had built, the past he thought he had escaped was beginning to feel less like a memory. And more like something that was still unfinished. Zuberi returned to the village again, but this time the air felt heavier, as if the place itself had already decided what he was to it. He told himself this visit would be different. That maybe the first time had been shock, misunderstanding, confusion that could be fixed with time. He had replayed the moment in his mind over and over again, trying to find logic in it. People forget faces. Time changes memory. Emotions cloud recognition. That was what he wanted to believe. But as he stepped into the village again, nothing felt softer. If anything, it felt sharper. The same paths he once walked now seemed quieter than before. Conversations stopped earlier. Eyes turned away faster. It was not open hostility, but something more uncomfortable: avoidance. People noticed him, then chose not to acknowledge him. A group of men sitting near the roadside fell silent as he passed. One of them shifted his gaze down, pretending to focus on something else. A woman carrying water paused for a second too long before turning away. Even the children, usually curious and loud, kept their distance as if instructed without words. Zuberi felt it immediately. This was not the same confusion he experienced before. This was awareness. He continued walking, slower now, scanning familiar faces for any sign of change. He told himself he would not let doubt enter again. He had come too far for uncertainty to take control of him. But the silence around him was beginning to feel structured, almost coordinated. When he reached his family's area again, his chest tightened. The house was the same, yet it felt distant, like something protected rather than lived in. He stepped closer, and this time his brother appeared almost immediately, as if he had been waiting. No surprise. No hesitation. Just a guarded expression. "You shouldn't be here," his brother said, his tone lower than before. Zuberi tried to stay calm. "I just want to talk. Properly." No confusion this time. But his brother didn't move aside. Instead, he looked past Zuberi briefly, toward the surroundings, as if checking something unseen. "That conversation already happened," he replied. "It didn't," Zuberi said firmly. "You didn't even listen to me." A pause followed, heavier than before. Then his brother spoke again, quieter this time, almost warning him. "Some things are better left alone." That line stayed in the air longer than it should have. Zuberi noticed something then. A flicker of movement behind the curtains inside the house. Someone was watching. His mother, maybe. Or someone else. But no one came forward. No recognition. No correction. No warmth. Only distance. And it was not just his family anymore. Even nearby neighbors avoided eye contact. The usual curiosity that once followed him had turned into something more careful, more controlled. As if his presence disturbed a balance no one wanted to explain. Zuberi took a slow step back, scanning the environment again. For the first time, a thought formed clearly in his mind, one he had been avoiding since his return. This was not misunderstanding. This was not memory failure. Something about his presence here was being resisted. And that realization changed everything he thought he understood so far. Because now it didn't feel like he was trying to reconnect with a forgotten past. It felt like the past was actively refusing to let him return. Zuberi stood a little further from the house this time, watching instead of approaching. He was no longer driven by emotion alone. Something had shifted inside him. The warmth he once carried into this place had slowly turned into observation. And observation revealed things emotion often missed. The first thing he noticed was timing. His brother did not appear randomly anymore. He appeared too quickly, as if he already knew when Zuberi would come. Not guessing. Not reacting. Waiting. That detail alone made something uncomfortable settle in Zuberi's mind. Then came the small contradictions. When Zuberi mentioned names from the past during their earlier encounter, his brother had reacted with irritation. But irritation is usually followed by denial or correction. Instead, there had been hesitation. A brief pause, like the mind recognizing something before deciding not to show it. That pause now echoed in Zuberi's thoughts. He shifted his attention to the house again. The curtains moved slightly, then stopped. Whoever was inside was no longer just watching casually. They were tracking. As if trying to measure how much he remembered, and how much he didn't. Zuberi took a slow step closer, but not toward the door. He circled slightly, pretending to adjust his position, while observing more carefully. That was when he noticed something else. His mother was not behaving like someone who didn't recognize him. She was behaving like someone who was avoiding recognition. There is a difference. A woman who does not know you reacts with confusion. A woman who refuses to know you reacts with control. And control was exactly what he was beginning to see. A faint sound came from inside the house, voices, low and urgent. Not calm conversation. Discussion. Tension. Then silence again, too sudden, too intentional. Zuberi narrowed his eyes slightly. Something had slipped before. A moment he had almost ignored at first. When he mentioned his childhood memory, the broken roof, the rain, The night they all stayed awake, his mother's hand had trembled. Not from confusion. From recognition. But she had buried it immediately. Why would someone suppress recognition unless recognition itself was dangerous? A strange thought formed in his mind, one he did not like but could not dismiss. What if they remembered everything clearly? What if the rejection was not because they forgot him, but because they chose not to acknowledge him? His breathing slowed slightly as he stood there, absorbing that possibility. It didn't make emotional sense, but it made behavioral sense. Fear, guilt, protection, any of these could explain silence. But coordinated silence across multiple people suggested something deeper. Something agreed upon. A sudden movement broke his focus. His brother stepped outside again, but this time he didn't come all the way forward. He stayed near the doorway, scanning the surroundings first before looking at Zuberi. As if checking if he had seen something he shouldn't have. Zuberi noticed it instantly. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, something passed between them, something unspoken, almost like pressure building behind words that were not allowed to exist. Then his brother spoke, carefully. "You should stop coming here." Not anger. Warning. That difference mattered. Zuberi didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied him. Every detail now felt important. The tone. The hesitation. The avoidance. The timing. Everything was aligned, too aligned. And for the first time, Zuberi stopped asking himself whether they recognized him. Instead, a far more disturbing question surfaced. What if they recognize him, but refuse to admit it? Zuberi stopped trying to force answers from the people in front of him. Instead, he began listening to the spaces between their words. He moved differently now through the village, less like someone returning home, and more like someone studying a place that no longer wanted to reveal itself. He didn't ask direct questions anymore. Direct questions only created walls. So he listened, observed, and waited for slips. And slowly, the slips began to appear. It started with fragments. A shopkeeper who stopped mid-sentence when a customer mentioned the old family story. A woman who quickly changed direction when Zuberi's name was spoken near her. An elderly man who muttered something under his breath before refusing to repeat it. At first, it seemed like superstition. Village gossip. The usual distortion of memory over time. But then the pattern became harder to ignore. Whenever Zuberi's past was hinted at, people didn't just avoid it. They corrected it. Too quickly. Too carefully. As if they had practiced forgetting. One afternoon, he sat at a small tea stall on the edge of the village, pretending to rest while listening to nearby conversations. Two men were speaking quietly at a distance, thinking he couldn't hear them. "I'm telling you, it was better when he was gone," one of them said. The other hesitated. "Don't say things like that." "He should not have come back," the first man insisted, lowering his voice. Zuberi's fingers tightened slightly around the cup in his hand, but his face remained still. Gone. Not left. Not ran away. Gone. That word carried weight. Later, he tried a different approach. He mentioned his childhood casually to someone he once recognized from the village. The man froze for a fraction of a second, then gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You should not talk about those times," he said quickly. "Why?" Zuberi asked calmly. The man hesitated too long before answering. "Some things are better left where they ended." Ended. Not forgotten. Ended. That evening, Zuberi returned to a quieter part of the village and sat alone, replaying every interaction in his mind. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was structured. Controlled. Like a shared agreement that existed beneath spoken language. And then came the rumor. It reached him indirectly, as all the important truths seemed to in this place. A younger boy, unaware of who he was speaking to, mentioned it while passing. "They say he died long ago," the boy said casually, kicking a stone as he walked. "That's why no one talks about him." Zuberi's head lifted slightly. "Died." He stood very still. The boy continued walking without noticing the shift in the air behind him. Zuberi didn't move for a long moment. The world around him kept functioning normally, voices, footsteps, distant sounds of daily life, but something inside him had already stopped. Dead. Not missing. Not forgotten. Declared finished. A story officially closed. But then why was he standing here? Alive. Breathing. Returning. The contradiction tightened in his chest like a slow grip. And for the first time since his arrival, the rejection, the avoidance, the silence, it all began to form a shape. Not confusion. Not coincidence. A decision. A decision made long before he ever came back. According to the village, he was never meant to return. The word dead did not leave Zuberi's mind. It stayed there, echoing quietly, reshaping every memory he thought he understood. If the village believed he was dead, then his return was not just unusual, it was impossible in their version of reality. And yet, he was here. Walking. Speaking. Being avoided like a mistake that had resurfaced. So someone had decided he was gone long before he ever knew it. Zuberi began retracing everything carefully now, not with emotion, but with structure. He started connecting fragments he had previously ignored. The hesitation in his mother's voice. The controlled silence of his brother. The coordinated avoidance from villagers who reacted too quickly, too uniformly. It didn't feel like confusion anymore. It felt like alignment. As if multiple people were following the same instruction. That realization changed the shape of everything. He remembered something his brother had said earlier, almost too casually: "Some things are better left alone." At the time, it sounded like a warning. Now it felt like enforcement. That wasn't a reaction. That was protection of a story. A story that had been agreed upon. Zuberi's mind drifted back to the moment he first left the village years ago. He had always assumed it was rejection, emotional neglect, lack of care. But now another possibility began to surface, one far more intentional. What if leaving hadn't been the end of their decision? What if it had been the result of it? He moved quietly that evening, avoiding attention, until he reached the edge of the village where older residents gathered. People who remembered more than they admitted. People who watched but rarely spoke. He didn't ask direct questions. He learned better now. Instead, he let conversations unfold around him. And eventually, a fragment appeared. A woman speaking to another, unaware of his presence nearby. "After what happened, it was safer that way," she whispered. Safer. Zuberi's body went still. The other woman hesitated. "But what about the boy?" A pause followed. A long one. Then, he was already declared gone. Declared. Not assumed. Declared. Zuberi slowly stepped back, keeping himself hidden in the shadows. His pulse remained steady, but something deeper inside him had shifted. This was no longer about memory or misunderstanding. This was documentation. Someone had officially removed him from the village's version of reality. And once that thought formed, everything else fell into place with terrifying clarity. If his death had been declared, then there had to be a reason. Not emotional. Not accidental. Practical. Fear. Shame. Money. Survival. Inheritance. Reputation. Something valuable enough to erase a person instead of dealing with them. His mind lingered on his family. His mother's trembling hesitation. His brother's controlled warnings. The way no one corrected the idea of his death. Not once. They had not been surprised by his return. They had been prepared for it. And worse, they had resisted it. Because if they acknowledged him, they would also have to acknowledge what they had done. Zuberi felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger yet. Something more precise. Understanding. He now realized the rejection was not the beginning of the truth. It was the defense of it. And somewhere beneath all the silence, beneath every avoided glance and carefully chosen word, there was something buried deeper than memory. Something they had all agreed never to uncover again. But he had already started digging. And some truths, once disturbed, do not remain buried for long. Because now he understood. The truth wasn't just painful. It was dangerous. Zuberi no longer waited for truth to come to him. He went after it. This time, he chose someone who could not easily lie their way out of fear or loyalty, someone who had been on the edges of every conversation, every rumor, every silence. An old man who used to sit near the village boundary, watching everything without ever fully joining it. People called him forgetful. Some called him harmless. But Zuberi had learned something important about places like this: the ones who spoke least often carried the most. He found the man sitting alone under the same dry tree, staring at the path like he was expecting something that never arrived. When Zuberi approached, the old man didn't react immediately. Only after a long pause did his eyes slowly lift. "You've been asking questions," the old man said quietly, before Zuberi even spoke. That alone confirmed it. Zuberi sat down at a distance, not aggressive, not emotional. Controlled. "I need answers," he said simply. The old man studied him for a moment, then looked away. "Answers are not safe things in this village." "I don't care," Zuberi replied. A silence followed. Not empty, but heavy, like something resisting being spoken aloud. Finally, the old man exhaled slowly. "You were not the first to come back asking." That sentence tightened something inside Zuberi's chest. "Who else came back?" he asked. The old man shook his head slightly. "No one comes back the same way you did." Zuberi leaned forward a little. "Stop avoiding it. Tell me what happened." For a moment, the old man said nothing. Then his voice dropped lower. "There was a decision," he said. "Not by one person. By many." Zuberi's eyes sharpened. "Decision about what?" The old man hesitated again, as if weighing consequences that still existed even after all this time. "About you," he finally said. The word hit harder than expected. Zuberi didn't move, but his breathing changed slightly. "Explain." The old man shifted uncomfortably. "You were becoming a problem." "A problem," Zuberi repeated, testing the word. "There were tensions in the family," the old man continued slowly. "Things people did not speak about openly. Money. Land. Influence. And you were, in the middle of it without knowing." Zuberi felt a faint coldness spread through his thoughts. "So what did they do?" The old man looked down at the ground. "They removed the problem before it grew." The words were careful. Deliberate. Not emotional. Just factual. Zuberi's jaw tightened. "Removed?" A long pause. Then, quieter, "They made it so you would no longer be part of the story." Something inside Zuberi shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. "So the village thinks I'm dead," he said slowly. The old man didn't answer directly. That was answer enough. Zuberi stood up, the chair beneath him barely making a sound. His face remained controlled, but his eyes no longer held confusion. Only alignment of pieces that had finally clicked into place. "Who decided it?" he asked one last time. The old man looked up briefly. "The ones who benefited from you not returning." A silence stretched between them. Zuberi turned slightly, looking back toward the village, the place he once called home, the place that now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. And for the first time, everything he had experienced since returning stopped feeling random. The avoidance. The silence. The fear. It was not confusion. It was protection. Protection of a version of reality where he no longer existed. And as that realization settled fully inside him, one final thought rose without permission. Everything he believed was a lie. Zuberi did not move for a long time after leaving the old man. He simply walked, slowly, through paths that suddenly felt different. Not physically changed, but emotionally rewritten. Every corner of the village now carried a second meaning, like a story hidden beneath another story. What he had just heard was not a rumor anymore. It was confirmation. And confirmation changes everything. By the time he reached a quiet spot near the outskirts, the weight of it had fully settled inside him. His family had not merely rejected him. They had participated in something structured, deliberate, and shared. That was the part his mind kept returning to. Shared. Not one person. Not a misunderstanding. Not emotion. A decision made collectively. He replayed every interaction again, but this time without innocence. His mother's hesitation was no longer confusion, it was restraint. His brother's warnings were not protective, they were controlled boundaries. Even the villagers' avoidance now made a different kind of sense. It was not fear of him. It was fear of consequence. Zuberi sat down slowly, his back against a stone wall, staring at nothing in particular. His thoughts were no longer scattered. They were forming a pattern he did not want to fully accept, but could no longer avoid. They had erased him. Not physically. Socially. Historically. Emotionally. And worse, they had replaced the version of him that once existed with a version that served their survival. A cold realization tightened in his chest. If the village believed he was dead, then his existence was not just inconvenient. It was dangerous to their stability. His return did not simply bring him back, it threatened everything built in his absence. Inheritance structures. Family reputation. Local influence. Even internal guilt that people had buried over time. His existence disrupted balance. And people fear disruption more than truth. That was the part that finally made sense of everything. It was not about who he was. It was about what he represented. A reminder. A mistake that spoke. Zuberi closed his eyes briefly, and for a moment he saw it clearly, not as fragments anymore, but as a full picture. The quiet agreement. The rewritten story. The way everyone had unconsciously learned the same version of events and repeated it until it became reality. He had not been forgotten. He had been edited out. A life removed not by distance, but by agreement. When he opened his eyes again, something in him had changed. The confusion was gone now. So was the emotional pull of trying to be understood. What remained was something sharper, quieter, more focused. Understanding without illusion. He stood slowly, turning back toward the village one last time. The place no longer looked like home. It looked like a system that had already made its choice long ago and was now protecting it at any cost. His family had not simply failed to recognize him. They had chosen a reality where he never came back. Because in that version of the story, they could continue living without consequences. And as Zuberi took a slow breath, one truth settled deeper than all the rest. They didn't forget him, They replaced him. Zuberi did not knock this time. He simply walked in. The house felt the same, but the meaning of it had changed completely. What once felt like home now felt like a closed room built on silence. Every object inside it suddenly carried weight, like evidence waiting to be questioned. His presence stopped everything instantly. His brother was the first to react, stepping forward with sharp alertness. "You again." "Enough," Zuberi said, his voice low but steady. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. His mother appeared behind him moments later. The moment her eyes landed on him, something flickered again, faster this time, harder to hide. But she still held back. Still refused. That refusal hit differently now. Because Zuberi no longer came with questions. He came with understanding. "You all knew," he said slowly. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of recognition. His brother's jaw tightened. "We don't know what you think you've learned." "I know enough," Zuberi cut in sharply. His voice finally cracked through the controlled calm he had been carrying. Not chaos, but pressure finally released. "I know I was declared dead," he continued. "I know the village believes it. I know all of you agreed to it." The air in the room changed immediately. His mother's hand moved slightly, then stopped. A reaction she couldn't fully suppress. His brother stepped forward again, but slower this time. "You shouldn't be saying things like that." Zuberi let out a short, humorless breath. "Shouldn't," he repeated. "Or you don't want me to?" That question landed heavier than anything before it. For a moment, no one spoke. And in that moment of silence, everything unspoken became louder. Zuberi looked at them one by one, his voice rising slightly now, not out of loss of control, but out of truth finally breaking containment. "You erased me," he said. "Not by accident. Not by confusion. You made a decision." His mother's eyes lowered for the first time. That small movement said more than words ever could. His chest tightened, not with sadness anymore, but with clarity so sharp it hurt. "Why?" he asked, voice quieter now. The question hung in the room. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Final. His brother hesitated. Just for a second too long. And that hesitation told Zuberi everything. He took a step forward. "No more hiding," he said firmly. "Tell me why." The pressure in the room built again. No one moved. No one spoke. But the truth was no longer distant. It was standing right there, refusing to stay buried any longer. Zuberi's eyes didn't waver. Not anymore. Because now he wasn't trying to be accepted. He was forcing them to face what they had already done. The silence that followed Zuberi's question did not feel empty anymore. It felt loaded. His mother finally looked up, but not fully at him. Her gaze stayed somewhere between him and the floor, as if even direct eye contact would force something to break open. His brother, on the other hand, looked restless now, anger no longer holding him together, only tension and something closer to fear. "You don't understand what you're saying," his brother said again, but this time his voice lacked strength. Zuberi didn't respond immediately. He was watching them differently now. Not as family. Not even as enemies yet. But as people standing inside the consequences of their own choices. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. That sentence alone changed the air again. His mother flinched slightly. For a moment, guilt rose in her expression. Not loud, not dramatic, just human. The kind that arrives too late to fix anything. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said softly, almost to herself. That was the first crack. His brother turned sharply toward her. "Don't start." But she continued anyway, her voice trembling now. We had no choice. Zuberi's eyes narrowed slightly. No choice, he repeated. His brother stepped forward quickly. You came back at the wrong time. You don't know what was happening then. People were talking. Things were unstable. The family name. So you erased me to protect a name? Zuberi interrupted. The question was calm, but it cut through everything. His brother stopped speaking. That silence was different now. Heavier. More honest. Zuberi felt something shift inside him. Anger was there, yes, but it was no longer uncontrolled. It was structured now. Focused. Like a decision waiting to be made rather than a reaction. His mother finally spoke again, her voice barely steady. We thought it was the only way to keep things from collapsing. To keep yourselves safe, Zuberi said. No one corrected him. That was the answer. He looked around the room slowly. The house that once represented his entire world now felt smaller, almost fragile. Not because it had changed, but because he had. Everything he had learned, everything he had survived, everything he had become outside this place suddenly stood on one side of him. And on the other side stood the people who had decided he should not exist in their version of the world. For a moment, something dangerous crossed his mind. Not loud. Not emotional. Just possibility. Power had changed him. Wealth had given him access, control, influence. If he chose it, this moment could end very differently. He could destroy what they tried to protect. He could expose everything. He could make them feel even a fraction of what he had been forced to live through. But alongside that thought came another one. He had not survived everything just to become what broke him. His gaze dropped slightly, then lifted again. His brother was still watching him carefully now, waiting. His mother looked broken in a quieter way, like someone who had been carrying a decision too long without knowing how to undo it. Zuberi exhaled slowly. The weight of everything pressed against him in that moment, not just what they had done, but what he might become because of it. And for the first time since his return, the question was no longer about the past. It was about him. What he would choose to be next. Zuberi stood outside the house long after the confrontation had ended. No one had followed him. No one had stopped him. The silence behind him was no longer filled with explanations or denials. It was simply unresolved. And for the first time, that silence did not pull him back inside. It stayed where it was, behind closed doors, with all its buried truths and unspoken guilt. He looked out toward the village slowly, letting his eyes move across familiar shapes that no longer carried the same meaning. Every place held a memory, but none of them felt like home anymore. It was strange how something could exist in your past so strongly and still feel distant in the present. Everything he had carried back with him had led to this moment. The pain. The success. The questions. The answers. But now that the truth was fully visible, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a mirror. Zuberi lowered himself onto a small stone near the path, sitting quietly as the wind moved through the dry air. For the first time since his return, there was no urgency in his body. No need to investigate, to confront, to prove. Just stillness. His mind moved back through everything slowly, without resistance. The boy who had been unwanted, sitting in silence while others ate. The young man who had been pushed out without explanation. The stranger he became in a world that taught him survival through distance. The version of him that returned, expecting recognition, only to be erased instead. Each version of him felt like a layer shed over time. Not separate people, but one life shaped by repeated rejection and reinvention. And now, standing at this point, he understood something that had been forming quietly beneath all the chaos. They had not only tried to erase him. They had unintentionally built him. Every act of exclusion had forced him outward. Every silence had made him observe more closely. Every loss had pushed him further into a world where he had to learn how to stand on his own without permission. His success was not just achievement. It was adaptation. But adaptation always carries cost. Zuberi looked down at his hands, noticing how steady they were now compared to the boy he once was. There was strength there, yes, but also distance. The kind of distance that forms when a person learns not to depend on places that once rejected them. He thought about revenge. It had been there earlier, briefly, like a reflex. A natural response to betrayal. But it no longer felt like direction. It felt like continuation of the same cycle that had shaped everything so far. Pain leading to more pain. Control leading to more control. And somewhere in that loop, he realized, he could lose the last thing that still belonged to him. Not his wealth. Not his past. But himself. He exhaled slowly, the weight inside him shifting, not disappearing, but changing form. The need to be understood faded slightly. The need to be recognized loosened its grip. What remained was something quieter. Something more difficult. Choice. Because everything that had happened, everything they had done, everything he had become had led to this single point where the past stopped deciding for him. Zuberi slowly stood up again, turning slightly toward the road ahead. The village behind him no longer called him back the way it once did. It only reminded him of who he had been. And that was no longer enough to define him. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about who he becomes. Zuberi stood still for a long moment, the weight of everything finally settling into something quiet and clear inside him. Then he turned. Not back toward the house. Not back toward the voices, the explanations, the broken history waiting behind closed doors. But away from it all. This time, there was no hesitation in his steps. As he walked, the village did not feel like it was losing him again. It felt like it had already lost him long before he ever returned. What remained now was only acceptance of that truth. No more searching for recognition that would never come in the way he once imagined. His brother appeared at a distance, watching silently, as if unsure whether to call out or let him go. His mother stood just behind him, still, fragile, caught between relief and regret that no longer had anywhere to go. But Zuberi did not stop. He did not need an apology anymore. He did not need denial, or explanation, or even understanding. What he had been chasing was not their acceptance, it was his own place in a story they had already rewritten without him. And now, he was choosing to rewrite it himself. As he reached the edge of the path, he paused once, just briefly. Not to return, but to acknowledge. A quiet recognition of everything that had shaped him, the pain, the silence, the abandonment, and even the rise that followed it. It all belonged to the same life. But it no longer controlled it. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time, the breath felt lighter. Behind him, the village remained unchanged. But inside him, something fundamental had shifted. The boy who once begged for belonging, the man who once returned seeking recognition, and the version of him that stood in confrontation, all of them now felt like parts of a journey that had reached its end. What remained was only forward motion. He began walking again, this time without looking back. There was no dramatic forgiveness spoken aloud. No final confrontation resolved with perfect words. Life did not offer closure in neat sentences. Instead, it offered something quieter, more permanent. Release. Not from memory, but from its control. From the need for approval. From the expectation of being understood by those who had already made their choice long ago. As he moved further away, the sounds of the village slowly faded, not disappearing completely, but losing their hold on him. The road ahead stretched open, uncertain but no longer heavy. And in that uncertainty, there was freedom. Because Zuberi finally understood that identity was not something given by the place you came from. It was something built by the decisions you make when that place refuses to recognize you. He walked on, steady and calm, carrying nothing now except himself. And in that silence, one truth remained behind him like an echo that would never fully disappear. Sometimes, the place you call home is the one that never truly existed. If this story kept you hooked till the end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful African folktales like this. And tell me in the comments, did Zuberi make the right choice, or should he have gone back?